This is Coffee with God, and I am Father Jose. Let us begin this day with the Word of God and a short reflection.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke, chapter 16, verses 19 to 31. The passage is taken from the Message version of the Bible. There once was a rich man, expensively dressed in the latest fashions, wasting his days in conspicuous consumption. A poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, had been dumped on his doorstep. All he lived for was to get a meal from scraps off the rich man's table. His best friends were the dogs who came and licked his sores. Then he died, this poor man, and was taken up by the angels to the lap of Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried in hell and in torment. He looked up and saw Abraham in the distance and Lazarus in his lap. He called out, "Father Abraham, mercy, have mercy. Send Lazarus to dip his finger in water to cool my tongue. I am in agony in this fire." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that in your lifetime you got the good things and Lazarus the bad things. It's not like that here. Here he is consoled and you are tormented. Besides, in all these matters there is a huge chasm set between us, so that no one can go from us to you, even if he wanted to, nor can anyone cross over from you to us." The rich man said, "Then let me ask you, Father, send him to the house of my father, where I have 5 brothers, so he can tell them the score and warn them, so they won't end up here in this place of torment." Abraham answered, "They have Moses and the prophets to tell them the score. Let them listen to them." "I know, Father Abraham," he said, "but they are not listening. If someone came back to them from the dead, they would change their ways." Abraham replied, "If they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, they are not going to be convinced by someone who raises from the dead." The Gospel of the Lord.
Reflections on the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, chapter 16, verses 19 to 31. The Gospel helps us to understand what it means to love. In the parable, the rich man has a sickness much greater than that of Lazarus, who was full of sores. This rich man has a terrible blindness because he cannot look beyond his world made of banquets and fine clothing. He cannot see beyond the door of his house where Lazarus lies. This worldliness is like a black hole that swallows up what is good, which extinguishes love because it consumes everything in it by itself. Pope Francis, commenting on this gospel, says, "By excluding Lazarus, the rich man has failed to take into account the Lord or his law, because to ignore the poor is to despise God." Lazarus represents well the silent cry of the poor of all times and the contradiction of a world in which immense riches and resources are in the hands of a few. The rich will be condemned not for their riches, but for having been unable to feel compassion for the Lazaruses and to help them. God's mercy is linked to our mercy towards our neighbor. When we ignore the poor at our doorstep, the mercy of God fails to find space in our closed hearts, and God's mercy cannot enter. If I do not open the door of my heart to the poor, that door also remains closed for God, and this is terrible. Remember the Magnificat of Mary. He cast the mighty from their throne and lifted the lowly. With this parable, Jesus teaches the essentials of compassion and the danger of riches that closes the eyes and hearts towards the needs of our brothers and sisters. Lent reminds us that this is the right time to convert and look for Lazaruses who await us, for they require our helping hands. Beware of the indifference that closes the heart to such situations of poverty and marginality. Be careful not to close the door of our hearts to the much suffering of others, because the only credentials before God will be our works of mercy with the poor. Learning to look at the poor from their poverty, the sick from their illness, or the marginalized from their marginalization is the goal of a well-understood charity, says the Pope. Let me leave you with two thoughts from Saint Basil the Great. The poor is not the one who has no wealth, but who refuses to share his wealth. He is so poor that he only has money. And the food and clothing that you do not need today do not belong to you. To the hungry belongs the bread that you withhold, and to naked man the jacket that you guard. Jealousy in your treasure box.